Welcome to the Bias Buzz. I'm Don Irvine. He's Jerry Cape, my special guest today. Thank you for coming in again.
Thank you for having me again. I don't often get invited back, but appreciate you doing it.
Yeah,
Moment of weakness on your part.
That's true. We have maybe a moment of temporary insanity. I don't know. Anyway, so it's we'll start off by just saying it's the first day of winter here, officially on the calendar, though it's felt a little chilly for the last several days anyway. I've never quite I guess I don't understand the calendar. I'm not the guy who looks at the calendar and figures out when the first day of summer and winter and everything is. But it always seems to be colder well before winter, hotter well before summer, so but I know others have been in the grip of winter for this period of time. So
I had no idea that climate change was going to be our first topic this morning.
Well, I thought we had to start off somewhere.
That's great.
All right, so just a few trending topics. Zsa Zsa Gabor has passed away, age of 99. Somebody who I think both of us remember, saw her in her prime. Married 9 times, I believe.
That shows some real talent. I've never seen anybody make more out of less in my life. I mean, granted, she was a great-looking gal, but she had no exclusivity on that. But she really turned that into a lot. And my biggest question is, did they bury her in Green Acres?
Well, I was with what? With her sister? Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, yeah, the two of them, Zsa Zsa and Ava, I mean, yeah, I would agree. Not necessarily the most talented people in the world, but boy, they milked it well.
Oh, unbelievable.
Yeah, so that was just something else. A couple other things that are happening, obviously, that just developed. We had the Russian ambassador in Turkey was assassinated, and then we had the Berlin truck attack at the Christmas market. Both terrible things. What do you think about what's going on here?
I agree they're both terrible, but I'll tell you the one that really is of a concern is what the Russian ambassador. This whole situation with Russia is very scary. They have had their eyes on Syria for decades. We almost went to war with them in the 1973 Yom Kippur War. My brother was a flight officer, and they went to whatever, DEFCON, whatever, in relationship to that. So the Russians have their eye on that part of the world. And what the Turks, and not so much the Turks, but the jihadis are going to find out is when you do something like that to a high-profile Russian, there's consequences to be paid. They don't play around, and they're going to find that out, and that's bad. The bad thing is that Russia's got 2,000 to 4,000 nuclear weapons. We are involved in all these treaties with European nations that have nothing to do with us. They asked the Kaiser in the middle of World War I why he was at war with half of Europe. He says, "I wished I knew." And I'm afraid we're heading into something like that too. We're involved in all of these treaties. They're not our self-interest. The Soviet Union, communism is over. The whole situation is scary, and the scariest words are coming out of Republican senators' mouth, like Mitch McConnell and McCain, saber-rattling against the Russians. The Russians are not our enemies. They may be less conducive to proper behavior than we like, but they got 4,000 nuclear weapons. I want to keep them close. I want to have a dialogue, and I do not want to punch the nose of the Russian bear.
Right, I agree with that. How do you think President-elect Trump and soon-to-be President Trump is going to handle this? I mean, this is not going to go away anytime soon.
Trump is going to be the best person by far to handle this, because if you study Donald Trump, you look at him, what he is this guy doesn't get involved in risky ventures. Whenever he did a business deal, he made sure he did his homework so that he would do a deal that he knew could work, and then he would milk it for all it's worth, like Zsa Zsa Gabor. And he realizes how dangerous the situation is with Russia. So one of the things he did, he made a Secretary of State, somebody who is very familiar with the guy. So he is hired properly for that. And he is going to have a great relationship with Putin. And that is the most important thing in our foreign policy for world peace, because we have to avoid any kind of conflict with the Russians. We are not at loggerheads with them, and they can help us in the war on terror.
All right, so you just mentioned the Secretary of State nominee. I mean, Rex Tillerson, the Exxon CEO, he's just going to retire now. With this development, do you think this makes much of a difference, or how does it affect our policy going forward? I mean, there's a lot of talk about the Democrats and others. They're going to really grill Tillerson during his nomination process. But does this assassination play and maybe change things a little bit?
Well, it points out how important our relationship with Russia and how we handle that. So, yeah, I want somebody that knows this guy. And Tillerson did a great job on behalf of his company, Exxon, and made them billions of dollars. And now he will work like that on behalf of our country. And he's an American patriot. And the most important thing about Tillerson you need to understand, if you don't understand scouting, you don't understand Tillerson. He was an adult leader in the Boy Scouts, and I have 2 Eagle Scouts as sons. I personally was a juvenile delinquent as a youth, not a scout. But it's a great organization, and anybody that's that deep in scouting, he's got good moral values. So he's very solid on that. He's solid on negotiation. He's solid on his knowledge. It makes him an even better choice for Secretary of State.
Okay, good.
The worse things get, the better choice he becomes.
That's probably true. All right, so now we also had the Electoral College voting. It's over, but there was a lot of controversy going in, and there was still controversy coming out of it. I thought it was interesting because a lot of noise was made about getting the Trump electors to abandon him and so they could flip that process to Hillary, which would have been virtually impossible considering the margin that would have needed to happen. But what was amusing to me in the end was that Hillary lost more electors than Donald Trump did. And it was just, I don't know. I mean, I don't even know what to say about this sometimes, except, once again, the Democrats and the liberals, they failed. They've been trying to overturn this election, trying to throw all these monkey wrenches in there, and they continue to fail.
This is like going to a buffet and everything on the table is your favorite food. I mean, they're just giving it to us hand over fist. So, number one, she had 8 electors that tried to defect. 5 were successful. Trump only had 2. But it's amazing. The media will obviously not report that either. So what this whole thing has been with the recount, with the elector thing, is there's 2 problems. And one is really good for the Republican Party, and one's just bad. The good thing for the Republican Party is that the Democrats are not taking stock and admitting that they have a problem. They won't take responsibility for their loss. It's the same thing they do when their public policies fail. They don't take responsibility, just double down and spend more money on things that don't work. And now what they're doing is they don't understand that they've lost. And it wasn't just to Donald Trump. They lost the House, the Senate, the governorships, and the legislatures. So their programs, which have been largely in power since FDR, have failed, and people know they failed. And you drive through anywhere in the Midwest, you'll see it. And they lost the election, but they keep trying to find other responsibility. Now, that's good for the GOP, because as longer they're like that, the longer they stay a Ted Kennedy party instead of a John Kennedy party, the less competition they're going to be. Republicans could be in charge for decades. And I know everybody laughs, and that might jinx it. The other thing that's bad for the country, though, is they're doing everything they can to delegitimize Donald Trump. And all this stuff is fake, and the news media repeats it, which is fake. But it makes an impression. It's part of the branding. The scary thing is, though, at some point, something will happen in the Trump administration that is real, and they will have laid this groundwork of phony criticism and delegitimization. I'm not even sure that's a word, to put that on top of. So they need the Democratic Party needs a 12-step program.
Yeah, at least. Well, okay, so now you're talking about that, the Democrats are, they're not accepting blame for this loss. We've seen a couple examples this past week. The president held his year-end and now his final press conference last week with the White House press corps, and during this hour and a half, which I sped through because Obama has this tendency to give these very long-winded answers that really go nowhere. For the most part, but there was a part in there where he talked about the election, and he basically blamed the loss on the media because they were so obsessed with all the emails and everything like that. And what's interesting about that is just that the media's reaction to that was pretty negative. On Twitter, on social media, that to see the president go after them. They've been a pretty good friend of the president. Now he goes after them like this. He doesn't have anything to lose. I mean, we're in 30 days, we'll have a new president in office. So, but still, it's just it's interesting to see that. And then we'll combine that also with Bill Clinton after he voted for Hillary on Monday in the Electoral College. He had a very kind of brief little interview with some of the reporters, and he blamed the loss of Hillary on the Russians and James Comey. And then, when asked to clarify that, he said, it was a phony email deal. So, we've once again, I think it goes back to that initial point you had, is that they just cannot bring themselves to grips as to why they lost, and they're using everything else but.
They're lying. There's a real problem with lying. If you lie, you have to either be a sociopath, know you're lying, and you don't have a problem with it. That is a safer thing to do. The less safe thing to do is if you're not a sociopath, you've been properly brought up, and you start lying, you now have cognitive dissonance. You're saying things that aren't true, and the only choice you have is to start to believe things that aren't true. And that is a very healthy step on the unhealthy path to insanity. And so that's what they're doing, and that's why it's another reason, in addition to the moral thing about why not to lie. So that's what you have going. Bill Clinton is probably just a sociopath, and he can come in and say these things, and he knows it's not true, but he's got to say something. I mean, think who has lost more than Bill Clinton? He has had to stay with Hillary because she stood by him for the since his infidelities, and he's had to stay with her. But at least at the end of it, he said, "Well, I get back in the White House." Now he's had to stay with her, and he's going to have to keep staying with her. And then you get to be in the White House. I mean, that is just losing all around. The most egregious lie that's out there is that Comey cost them the election. They want to keep believing it. That's great. It works for us. But it's not. I and other people in the campaign were looking at the early voting. And I remember the date, October 21st. And we started to see it in the Virginia counties, the heavily Democratic counties. Their early voting was off 40 and 50%. And we knew, in particular, the black community, which votes 92% for Obama, was going to roll back to like 85% for Trump, which is more normal for a Republican. And we're going to not vote for Hillary by not coming out. And our people were coming out like crazy. That election was over 2 weeks before it started. It didn't get lost in the last 3 or 4 days, last week, with the Comey thing. And the other thing they're saying, have you noticed that they haven't come out and said, oh, those emails aren't ours, they're not true, they're out of context? What everybody is missing is, by not denying them, they are confirming that they are true. They are confirming that they colluded with the media. They are confirming that they rigged the primary election. If you want to talk about something that is un-American, anti-democratic, they rigged the only evidence hardcore that we have on the election is that they rigged the primary. So, and here's the other interesting thing. When you talk to liberals and Democrats, you go, well, what about the emails and the Veritas videos? They go, what are you talking about? They choose not to know the truth. So when the ones who choose not to know the truth, those are the ones that probably aren't sociopaths.
That's true. Well, and there's, for the rest of us, I think there's some glaring things out there. Even you see some reports in the media. Why did Hillary lose? One thing is that her honesty and trustworthy numbers were, the public didn't trust her. Not that Trump's numbers were all that much better necessarily, but that weighed her down. And what was weighing her down in that is things like Benghazi, which was discussed. The emails definitely had an effect because, as you talked about, they never denied that these things weren't true. So yes, they did confirm that all this nonsense was going on, and how they rigged this thing for Hillary and make everything they could to get Bernie out of there, because Hillary was the chosen one, and that they were going to have to do everything they could. That basically cost Debbie Wasserman Schultz her job as a DNC chair, but you have. And she was a terrible candidate overall. She didn't connect with voters, and she was arrogant to the sense that thinking that, look, we didn't have to worry about that blue wall. We didn't have to worry about Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, Michigan, those things. Those are reliable Democratic states. They've been reliably Democrat for decades. We don't have to put our money there. Instead, they spend money and they open up an office in Utah thinking that there might be a shot to take out Utah. The strategy was bad. Trump had the message. He appealed to these people. He had the right message at the right time. And I think that's what, in the end, what won it over. She was a deeply flawed candidate, and the Democrats are just having a really hard time admitting what a bad candidate she was, because she's a Clinton. She's you have to hold her up, and she's a woman. You can't. Her basic argument to me was that you need to elect me because I'll be the first woman president in U.S. history, right?
That was the only thing she had going for it, was that nature hates a vacuum. And the problem with Hillary Clinton is she has a vacuum. She is not a good candidate. She's not likable. She's not a good speaker. She doesn't enjoy a single quality the candidate has. And the irony is, here we're in the era of women and feminism and doing their own thing, and everything she has is as a result of being married to somebody. Whereas we have so many women that have accomplished on their own. They pillory Sarah Palin, but her husband isn't a great guy, but he has nothing to do with her career. Bill Clinton had everything to do with her career. Without Bill Clinton, she wouldn't have had anything. And nature hates the vacuum, so she has none of these qualities, so it all gets filled with the negativity of the emails and Benghazi and everything else. And she had no program. I would badger Democrats in debate. I say, give me her message. What's her program? She had nothing. And the other thing is, I'm beginning to think it might be true that the Russians hacked it, and she asked for 3 million more votes, and she said Midwest, and they heard out West. So they gave her the 3 million in California instead of giving them to her in the Midwest. It would have helped her win the election. You know, she's also geographically challenged.
Yeah, okay, that's something I hadn't quite thought about in that regard.
Well, that's why you have me here.
That must be it. Okay, well, another thing on the emails too. So we also had Donna Brazile, who is the acting DNC chair, and she came out and she just said that one of the reasons they lost was that the emails were weaponized against them. And I guess, what was it? Were weaponized to sow misinformation. Really?
Well, you got to understand something. You always got to look through the source. Now, Donna Brazile comes from Kenner, Louisiana, which is right outside of New Orleans, Louisiana. And you got to understand, like, the difference between Maryland and Louisiana, when the Maryland governor gets caught with his hand in the cookie jar, he gets put in jail or he gets indicted. He can't run again. But down in Louisiana, when that happens, they get caught, they get in trouble, they get convicted, and then everybody says, wow, man, can't Edwards run for governor again? So Donna Brazile gets caught lying, colluding with the campaign on questions, and she has absolutely no sense of shame, God bless her, typical gal from Louisiana, and she comes in and she comes out with this stuff, which is, misinformation. The emails are not denied. Obviously, the emails are real information. But she comes out and says the woman has no shame. She'd be a good salesperson for a bad operation that sells on lies, and that's a bad way to sell, by the way.
And I thought I was going to get out of this show without a reference to Louisiana with Brian on vacation, and sure enough, you found a way to sneak that in on me. All right, so another thing that came out was John Kerry said that he actually was thinking about running for president in 2016. Now, that was really the first I'd heard of that. I can't even fathom how that would have gone.
Well, I'll tell you, that is indicative of how bereft of any opportunity the Democrats have. They have no bench. I mean, they're going to put Hillary up there, and they put up O'Malley and Bernie as cannon fodder, and the cannon fodder almost would have beat her. So, and Kerry was a terrible candidate, and he got his brains beaten in when he ran last time. And if he's thinking about running, that just shows you again, nature hates a vacuum, and they've got no good candidates to put in anywhere. Not now, not next time, not next time, not next time. They have got a serious problem going forward.
Well, that's the thing, too, is that in your mind, is there anybody that would be a reasonable candidate to run in 2020 at this point? I mean, I don't see the bench. Their own leadership elections, they are sticking with the same old crowd, Pelosi, all this leadership that has brought them to the brink of disaster here for them. If you look at 2018 for the Senate, you look at 2020 for the presidency, where are they going to get the candidates to be able to hold what they've got without losing their shirt?
I have almost never been at a loss for words, but I find myself at a loss to answer that question because I cannot think of anything. And my mind is racing back and forth like a computer program, and they don't have anybody. They really don't have anybody. And the only people they have are old, and the old are some of my favorite people, like myself. And all of my friends and relatives are even older than I am. But these people, they don't have anybody. And the problem is they don't have a plan. All of their ideas go back 100 years to Marxism. It's socialism at some point. It's proven not to work in Eastern Europe and Western Europe, and it had failed in the U.S. And until they get their mind right and admit, okay, we got a problem, this is not working, we need to reboot, They need to find candidates that offer some hope for the future for young people. Right now, all they offer is just absolute misery.
I mean, is Tim Kaine even in the discussion for 2020?
You know, I would donate to Tim Kaine running. I mean, what a bad candidate. And I got to tell you something. I happen to be the same religion as he is, at least for now, and he is an embarrassment. I mean, I've heard of cafeteria Catholics, but you cannot be a cafeteria Catholic on abortion. That just doesn't work. There's certain aspects of the church that you cannot deviate from, and abortion and Notre Dame football are two of them.
I want to note here that my only official co-hosts on this program, they're all Catholic.
I'm at a loss for words for that, too. On behalf of all of my fellow religionists, I apologize for all our shortcomings.
Okay, well,
And they have that same problem on the Supreme Court. They got too many Catholics up there, too.
Is that the problem?
Well, they got the same problem in South Louisiana. Got too many Catholics down there, too.
All right, so you mentioned this a little bit earlier on at the beginning and talking about fake news. So this has become the buzzword, out there now is, fake news, all this. Facebook announced this past week that they're going to try to fight fake news, and their method is that they are now going to have a third-party fact checkers, and that will include ABC News, the Associated Press, PolitiFact, FactCheck.org, and Snopes. So there we've got these 5 pillars of fact-checking out there, so that if you see fake news and you spot it and you flag it, they will then turn it over to them, and those people will then determine whether or not that should be thrown into dispute, and you should get the warning that this news may not be authentic, kind of a thing like that. Seems to be a little bit one-sided in terms of who the fact checkers are.
The Democratic Party and the liberals have a real war on the First Amendment. They really hate free speech. The only free speech they like is theirs, and they don't like any counter to it. And it also goes back to one of the reasons there are no liberal left-wing talk radio shows is 3 hours on the air, 5 days a week. That's a lot of time. You got to have a lot of energy, you got to have a lot to say, and it's got to hold up to logic. Their argument does not hold up to logic. It doesn't hold up to callers. It holds up on MSNBC, where they can do it in half-hour and 60-minute segments and bring on the people they want to reinforce their lunacy. Or Chris Matthews can talk over somebody who brings up a good idea, but you can't do that for 3 hours in radio. So what they've done in the news media and your organization is they have squashed any kind of news. Now they come out and they publish fake news. They're fake news. The Benghazi was caused by video, false. Hands up, don't shoot, false. The Russian hacking, no information. But they put that out there for days, weeks, and months, and it's like our mother said with first impressions. It has a brand, it has an effect. When it's turned to find out to be false, it doesn't have the reverse effect. And now what they want to do is take the organic thing that's happening, which news, and people are saying things in different voices, and they want to squash it. And I got to tell you something that is really scary, because Donald Trump got his campaign started in social media, on Twitter, and especially on Facebook. Larry Hogan got elected governor in Maryland. He got that started 3 or 4 years before with Change Maryland on Facebook, because it had an open forum and people could hear it. But we're down to these 2 channels, Twitter and Facebook. And if they curtail that, we got a real problem in this country. So what the Republicans have to do is they have to put some really ornery guy as an FCC commissioner. I'm thinking Jerry Cave would be a good example to scare the heck out of them, so they don't do stuff like this. But the people that you've named, the organizations that you've named as their fact checkers are fake. So they're trying to turn Facebook into fake book, and that's a really bad idea for America.
Yeah, I mean, can you argue that a lot of what we've been reading in the news media for the last 30 years has been fake news anyway?
It has been fake news, and the problem is we all, because of the post-World War II situation in advertising, became one newspaper towns, and everybody in broadcasting, because they're lazy as they can be, they just follow what's in the Post or the Washington Post or the New York Crimes, and they just repeat it. So what we had before that, and my grandfather and my father and I would read through newspapers a day. I'd read 1 or 2, and I'd mix up the third. Now I read hours on the internet, and I get different perspectives, and it is up to me to find out and figure out what is truth by getting these different perspectives. what's really funny is they go, oh, bloggers are terrible. Let me tell you something. You put a reporter on a story, he knows nothing about it. He's barely likely to get it right. But a blogger, what does he blog about? He or she blogs about something that they are passionate about, knowledgeable about, and that's probably better. But it is up to the American people to read multiple sources and come to that decision about who they're going to vote for and what they're going to believe. And Americans have gotten to be a little bit lazy in this regard. They probably always have been. But if they have any doubts, they can just look at our podcast and we'll tell them what's happening.
Oh, that's true. Well, one of the things that gets me about this, though, is just that earlier this year, Facebook, in reaction to criticism they had received from conservatives about having a liberal bias in the news feed and things like that, they invited a bunch of conservatives out to California and they met with them for a day. It seemed like maybe it was a little bit of a peace offering or something. They wanted to try to mollify the conservatives that they were going to make sure that Facebook was going to be fair and equitable and things like that. But then now to fight quote fake news, they line up nothing but a bunch of liberal news type organizations to do this. That doesn't tell me that anything that they did back earlier this year with the conservatives to say we're going to address your concerns is going to be addressed at all. It's going to get worse.
They're asking the people, they are soliciting help to stop fake news, of which there's not one example of fake news that they've given that I've seen. They're going to get the people that have been creating fake news to police fake news. I mean, ABC and all these people, they're the ones that have supported, if they said Donald Trump was going to win in a landslide, they said the GOP was going to lose the Senate, all of that's turned out to be wrong, and they're the ones that are going to, this is really a problem. This is not something we can just go, the open pipeline for news is now social media, and I hate to say what I'm about to say, but this really is an FCC issue. This really is something that we need to look at to keep the pipeline open. There used to be a rule in broadcasting you'd only own 7 AM and 7 FM radio stations and 7 TV stations because they didn't want any one entity to have too much of a control of news and public affairs. And right now we got Facebook.
Yep. All right. So quickly, the last item before we go to 2-minute warning here is just Media Matters. Left-wing organization is now going to stop going after Fox News like they have been for years, and they're now going to shift their focus to the alt-right. What say you?
The left is great. I mean, I want to tell you something. I don't know who said this, but I've never had anybody been able to refute it, and that is liberalism is a incompetent philosophy wielded by competent practitioners, and conservatism is a competent philosophy wielded, generally speaking, Trump being the exception, by incompetent practitioners. And they are really good. This is great theater on their part. They are making stuff up. They make up a term alt-right. They all act like it exists and it's true. They get confirmation bias from people, and they're making it up. There is no alt-right. There is no, it was right-wing vast conspiracy. Now it's alt-right. It's all BS, and I refuse to accept it, and it's just a lie.
All right, you have 60 seconds to finish off.
Donald Trump's going to be incredibly successful, and it's written all over his face, and it's based on what he's done. So when Donald Trump would do a real estate deal, he would pick a deal that he knew was going to work for him, and then he would, because he did his research, and then he would make it work, and then he'd sell the heck out of it. And he is going to do that. He picked being president because he knew he could make it work, and here's why. We have all of the economic, military, and political leverage necessary to get better defense treaties to save us money and get the Europeans and the people in Korea, Japan, and Saudi Arabia to pick up their share of defense. So that will happen. We have all of the leverage on trade. China, Europe, they have to do what we want on trade, because if they lose access or diminished access or even might lose access to our retail markets, they will have recessions, depressions, or in China, revolution, so he can do that. He is the master of negotiation, and what he has to do on Capitol Hill is negotiate. So he will be very good with that. And the Democrats have been enormously helpful in making Donald Trump be successful, because he can do executive orders like Obama and undo stuff. He has the nuclear option in the Senate, so we don't need to have 60 of those guys. And a lot of the problems are with the bureaucracy of regulations, which they can undo without getting involved in more elections and with Congress. So Donald Trump is going to be very, very, very successful, and that we are going to enjoy two ways. We are going to enjoy it organically by the success us Americans experience, and we are going to enjoy the theater of watching the liberals writhe in agony as Donald Trump is successful and makes America great again.
All right, that's all the time we have. Merry Christmas to everyone, and we'll see you again next week on The Bias Buzz.